Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bharti, and we are here at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in Paris. And today we have with us Sitaram Iyer, Senior Director of Cloud Native Solutions at Venafi. Sitaram, first of all, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Swapnil. Thanks for having me.
So, talk a bit about the company. What do you folks do?
So Venafi is in the space of what we refer to as machine identity management. So I'll have to break it up a little bit to explain what that means. And at the easiest way to sort of describe what machine identities are is to start comparing it with human identities. As you know, anytime you have to use some sort of a service or some sort of a system, you log in. So you're a human user logging into a system. There is a whole IAM space that is managing human identities. Machine identities are specifically focused on anything that is non-human. And machine in this context is not just a physical machine or a virtual machine of any type. It could be code, it could be service, it could be an application. And most importantly, in the context of KubeCon that we're talking, it could be containers. And there, the exponential nature or the comparison between the human identities and the machine identities start to differentiate, right? You may have the human identity space is well known. The machine identity space is not very well known, and the number of machine identities that you see across the enterprises is humongous when compared to human identities. And sometimes it's 50x or 500x, because every service needs an identity, every machine needs an identity, every application needs an identity, every workload needs an identity, and all of those identities are mostly used in the context of accessing other services, accessing other workloads, accessing other resources. So we see this as a massive opportunity to help organizations manage identities at scale, specifically the non-human identity parts of it. So that's the business we are in. We focus obviously on all aspects of machine identity management, all the way from issuing an identity, and in this case, the identity is a certificate-based identity. In some ways, we also there is an underlying sort of a aspect of machine identity management, which is certificate lifecycle management. Certificate lifecycle management involves the ability to issue a certificate, renew a certificate, rotate, revoke, all of those aspects of how a certificate is managed. So that is part of the overall machine identity management space. So sometimes people look at Venafi and say, oh, I need to manage certificates, and we are a certificate management company. So that's part of the whole machine identity management space.
Perfect. And how old is the company?
So we are about 15 plus years.
15 plus years.
I would say close to 20 years now.
Right. So which means that you folks predate this whole Kubernetes movement.
Absolutely.
So how have you seen the identity management evolved over time? Because we moved from a data centers to cloud, not just cloud, multi-cloud, not just multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and now we are going to edge also. So how has identity management, not just the human and machine, evolved over time?
No, great question, Swapnil. I think it's absolutely right. So we've been in the business for a long time. We have about 600 plus enterprise customers, global 500, who use Venafi for a lot of different use cases. And as you said, many of them predate the world of cloud native, many of them predate the world of Kubernetes. So most importantly, if you think about machine identity management, it starts at the simplest level, right? You have a website, it has a padlock. That is an identity for that website. Who is issuing that? How is it managed? How is it rotated? So for most organizations, the worst thing that can happen is an outage because of a certificate that has expired. So that is something that everybody avoids, which has been the predominant business opportunity for Venafi for the last 18, 20 years. Many of the organizations run massive scale of servers, massive scale of things like load balancers, firewalls, HSMs, all of those are classics technologies that organizations have been running for the last, 15, 20, 30 years for a long time. They all need an identity. They all need a certificate. And that's essentially the traditional core business that we have sort of, built on for the enterprises. Obviously, there has been a gradual change or a shift towards adoption of cloud that happened, let's say, 10 years ago or so. And then eventually a much more streamlined adoption of cloud native technologies. So each one of them in its own phase has provided greater opportunities for Venafi, all the way going from here I need an identity for securing my load balancer, you're now thinking about I need an identity for a workload, or I need an identity for a load balancer that is managed by a cloud provider. So I need that trust anchor or an identity that is approved by the organization, because every organization have their own certificate authorities that they trust and that they manage, and that they basically backed by an HSM or anything of that sort. But eventually you want to get into a stage where each of those identities anchor back to that trust anchor that is managed by the CA. And as you do that, the technologies have evolved around how those applications are deployed. Many of them have adopted multiple hypervisors. You're in multiple cloud environments. You're running Google Cloud, you're running Azure, you're running AWS, and they all have applications that require some sort of a communication that is SSL based. That means they need an identity. So that has been the next level of opportunity that we've seen, where cloud adoption has increased the number of identities that are required by the organization. The same sort of identities that were required for, let's say, an Apache server now is not one identity. I need 100 more identities, because I am automatically scaling, automatically shutting down my instances in the cloud. And many of them are highly ephemeral, so which means I need identities that map to the ephemeral nature of my workloads. That's one area of shift with that. So then obviously, cloud native technologies started to see a lot of adoption within our enterprise. Obviously, in the Kubernetes being that leading technology for container orchestration, also drove the opportunity where organizations start to think less about developing monolithic applications and started deploying architectures that are much more microservices based. That also means each one of them is a machine from our perspective, right? So now what used to be one box is 1,000 boxes, and each one of those boxes need an identity. And these identities, in the context of Kubernetes, we refer to them as workloads. And these workloads need an identity, and those workloads require an identity so that they can talk to other services, they can authenticate to other services, and as part of that model, you need to have the ability to authorize as well. And it's not just about workload to workload authentication, it's also sometimes workload to a resource authentication. A simple example would be, you may have a hello swapnil container that's running that needs to talk to another container, or you may say, in addition to talking to my other container, I also need to access AWS and list out all of the resources in an S3 bucket. That's a different kind of an authentication that is required. But here it is workload to workload, workload to resource, or workload to another workload across multiple different cloud providers, right? So now you can almost imagine what used to be a well-known set of machine identities that can be easily managed. Now you have an explosion of identities that needs to be managed, which are highly scaling, and most often in the world of Kubernetes, you're deploying applications, you're destroying them. You have a pipeline that is automatically sort of generating new workloads every day. And as you do that, you're also destroying the old ones. So the identities are constantly being issued, managed, renewed. And most often these days, we talk about these identities being extremely short-lived and highly ephemeral, as opposed to a website which used to have an identity which is valid for 1 year. Even that is changing with Google's announcement around 90-day certificates and all of those things, right? So the lifetime of these identities are continuously reducing, and mostly in the context of adoption of cloud native, it has even become more shorter, and that's where we are seeing a lot of opportunity.
And when you talk about opportunities there, when it comes to identity management, if you look at the Kubernetes complexity, that is also there. Is when we look at the whole sprawl, not only the projects are there, you have it's not as easy as the lamp stack as it used to be. Vendor sprawl is also there, and then we are talking distributed cloud all the way edge. So what are the pain points that teams, organizations face when you talk about these 600 customers? Some of them may be big, they have resources. Some are smaller, they don't have. So what are the pain points? What are the challenges that they face when it comes to identity management, whether it's machine or human? And that's where Venafi comes to help them.
Yep. So the biggest challenge that customers always run into, and in order to explain that, I have to sort of break two different teams within an organization. There is a security team, then there is the platform engineering. platform engineering, just as you said, do not operate lamp-like stacks these days. They are using distributed cloud environments like Kubernetes and all of these technologies, which is giving them a rapid way of developing, deploying, and running applications. Security team focuses predominantly on governance and compliance and these kind of things which needs to map to those things. In the past, it was much easier for them to say, if it is a LAMP stack, you have a Linux server, an Apache server, MySQL, and it's much easier. Here's my LAMP stack, here's an identity that is required for it, I know it, I can manage it. And explaining that to security team now about the growing complexity of Kubernetes and all of the projects that you run in it, because it's not just running Kubernetes. And as soon as you run Kubernetes, you say, well, what do I need? Oh, I need an ingress controller. Oh, then I need something. I need lots of things to run in that cluster. That's not well understood by the security team. They are focused on security, compliance, governance. So at Venafi, we actually marry the teams in a way where there is a way for security team to support not just the traditional business, but also support the new platform engineers in a way where they can consume the set of services much more autonomously within the environment that they operate in. And in order to do this, we've done a few things. One, we have our own CNCF project, which is called Cert Manager. Cert Manager is an incubating project within CNCF, especially something that is used in many of the Kubernetes distributions as a way to manage certificates. Secondly, as you sort of think about security, very often they are issuing a certificate that is backed by a certificate authority, and typically they are used to this idea of, hey, I need a certificate. Or fill up a form, tell me the common name, tell me the properties, and I'll give you a certificate a week later. That doesn't work in the world of platform engineering. So what we've really done is built this component, what we refer to as Firefly, basically a distributed autonomous issuer that runs locally at where your workload is and issues identities much more closer to where the applications are. Instead of telling the platform engineer, send me a request, I will process it, send you an identity back. They don't have to worry about it. They can have an identity that is bootstrapped right into their application that is locally issuing the identities. But from a security perspective, because they are the ones who are managing that, they can still drive the compliance, governance, and the policy controls without compromising on, hey, I gave something to a platform engineer and they shouldn't be getting a certificate for hello.supnil.com. They should be only getting certificates for dev.supnil.something.com and nothing else. Those are the kind of policies that they can drive without worrying about somebody compromising or using it for purposes other than what it is intended to be.
And if an organization, because once again there are different teams doing different things, they have their own identity management. Some of the cloud providers also, they do that. How well does Venafi, right?
Yep.
How well does Venafi fit into that, or they have to do a lot of reworking? How seamless it is that they don't have to change for you adapt for them.
Yeah, that is exactly the point that we drive as well. So there is one thing that we absolutely drive from a platform engineering perspective is you've already adopted pipelines, you already adopted tools, you already adopted technologies that you have made part of your platform. We have no intention of changing that, but we can plug into that much more seamlessly with an issuer that is managed by Venafi. And in the case where, and you bring up a good point, if I'm running, let's say in AWS, and I have AWS resources, very often I want a certificate that is in ACM, right? So, because that's the easiest way for me to manage. From an organization's perspective, security wants to ensure that they can continue to use ACM. So we make it simple by saying, use the identity that is organization approved. We will help you import it into ACM automatically so that you have an ARM that you can use as part of your local workloads within AWS. Similar with Google CAS in GKE, or with importing into Azure Key Vault. So all of those integrations into the various different cloud providers is first class for us. So we do provide a first class integration into every cloud provider so that from a perspective of not just the platform engineer who is operating in Kubernetes, but also people who are operating on cloud resources. Like they could be developing serverless applications that will use a resource directly from AWS or directly from Google Cloud or from Azure. How do you get that identity? So we make that simple through first-class cloud-to-cloud integrations. So Venafi offers both a data center enterprise platform and also a SaaS offering. Our SaaS offering and data center platform, we refer it to as the Venafi control plane. Part of that, there is cloud-to-cloud integration. There is seamless integration locally built within the cluster through Cert Manager, through other add-ons that we provide as a way to build that integration.
When we look at different teams, security teams, platform engineering teams, developers, operators, I mean, we can label them, but the way they work is different. When it's come to identity, because we talk a lot about culture these days, right? The cultural change is not the old word, where, you just eat product, you're done, So when it comes to identity management, does it also need a kind of cultural change, the approach they have towards identity management, or tools are enough, number one? If some sort of culture, because in cloud network, you do need to change the way you look at things. If that cultural change is needed, what role does Venafi play in becoming a catalyst to the change?
Yeah, so we almost describe ourselves as a bridge between developers and security, because developers have their own way of doing things. I want to go fast. If I have to go fast, and if I need an identity for something, what's the best way for me to get an identity? If I look at a documentation, I'll generate a self-signed certificate. I will use it from a perspective of the functionality of that application. It just works. But you can imagine security teams and thinking, how can you use self-signed CA? It's not compliant. It's not so. So there is a cultural change, education that needs to happen as well, and that's where we are essentially seeing we being the bridge between security and the developers. And it can't be just saying security wants this, so you have to comply to it, and that's never going to fly. Which also means that we have to work closely with the developers and also with the platform teams, because end of the day, if you look at the typical organization, platform teams own the platform, developers build applications and deploy into that platform. Platform teams typically own the set of projects or set of components that run in the cluster that you just talked about, because when a developers come in, they typically don't have the permissions to deploy whatever they want. So they already have a built platform that's provided. So we want to work with the platform team to also drive that cultural shift to say that you've got a set of services that you can make part of your platform that developers can easily consume without doing any extra work. And all of this doesn't happen overnight. There is a cultural change. There is an education thing. There is a process through which we go through every time, because typically developers think that, security tools, they're going to slow me down, or it's going to take a long time for me to adopt. And I think those are the cultural changes that is happening in many organizations. But you're right, so it takes time, and it's not easy to do in some places.
There are a lot of things in your pipeline that you cannot share yet, but just give us a glimpse what we can expect from Venafi this year.
Yeah, so our focus obviously has been to go beyond what we're trying to. So we are in the path, and that was one of the announcements that we just made yesterday. The idea of having a workload identity issuer, the notion of a workload is important for us, and that's what we're focusing on this year. And it's not just to issue an identity, but build on top of that to do the full cycle, authentication, authorization, and also spend a lot more time in the areas of being quantum proof ready. So because there's all of the work that we're doing, especially in the cryptography, to be quantum proof. And there are algorithms that NIST has published, talked about, and those are some of the areas that we're working on. Signing, when we talk about containers and image, supply chain security challenges and the ability to sign and build a provenance around it, especially in the cloud native world, that's another area of business for us. Because when we talk about machine identities, there are 4 pillars. When we talk about TLS identities, which is what I spend most of the time on, then there are the SSH identities, then there are the code signing identities, and then there are the SPIFFE-based identities. Because all of the workload-specific identities that I talked about, they're all SPIFFE-based identities. That's the area of focus for us. So we've already announced support for SPIFFE with our distributed issuer, the workload identity issuer Firefly. We want to take it further to make sure that there is more more enterprise value that we can drive for our customers beyond just being an issuer, right? So that's the area of work that we're doing.
Since you mentioned Spiffy, I also want to understand, its importance at the when we look at federated identities at the workload level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think great point. Spiffy and the combination of the words that you use, federated identities at the workload level, they all gel together, right? So, because that's exactly what Spiffy is intended for. So basically, when we talk about workloads in the cloud native world, we want an identity that is derived. We don't want to say, oh, here's a workload, let me figure out what I want to call it. We don't want to do that. It's a simple example that I can take is me and you are talking here. If I were to attach a Spiffy ID for it, it's simple. Spiffy : / Paris, Swapnil / Sitaram meeting, right? So that's the Spiffy ID. So we just identify it based on the context in which we are. And that's true for workloads as well, because workloads are running somewhere. They are owned by some service account. They run in some namespace. They are owned by some trust domain. So generating a Spiffy ID for something should be easy for a workload identity issuer that we're talking about. But once you do that, we have to sign it. There needs to be a signer which will ensure that that Spiffy ID is cryptographically verifiable, because communication between two workloads or resources should be certificate based. So that ensures you are truly building an encrypted line between these communications and also ensuring they are policy compliant. And I think that's the announcement that we made. Support for Spiffy with Firefly to ensure governance, policy controls, all of those things, but also doing it at scale, because you're not seeing one workload, you'll see thousands of workloads, and you can't say, well, I need to find an identity for that, or I need to find an identity for that. You want to be able to derive it automatically, just in time. That's what we're doing.
I mean, of course, I have to ask this question because this is the hottest topic also. The keynotes, everybody is talking about it. You know what I'm talking about. So when it comes to identity management, when it comes to Venafi, where is Gen AI? Where are LLMs there? Now we can look at them as workloads, or we can look at them as empowering identity management.
Absolutely. So generative AI has been a focus for us, and thank you for bringing it up. I almost forgot to mention that. So at Venafi, there are a couple of areas where we are focused on generative AI, and also using the data that we have and all of the language models that we have developed, primarily to do a couple of things. And a couple of things are done in two ways. One, we have a product that we call Project Athena, and this is to help all of the security and our platform engineers to manage identities at scale without worrying about how it's done, what it's done, and all of those things. So Athena is basically our AI offering as part of Venafi to help establish the best practices, to help best establish the automation framework, and also to make sure that people, as they work together, the different teams, they have an easy way of managing identities at scale. That's one area. The other area that we have done some work in this space is to also publish our model on Hugging Face, and this is called Project Vikram Explorer, so that we can engage with the community and have them also contribute back to our model, so that we can improve on how identities can be managed at scale and what does it look like. So there are two areas. One, obviously for our enterprise customers in the form of Athena. Two, for the community in the form of Vikram Explorer. So obviously we have to play into the world of Gen AI, and AI is something that we are focused on. Absolutely.
Sitaram, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course, great discussion there, great insights, and I would love to chat with you folks again. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Swapnil. It was great to be here, and wish you the best the rest of the conference. Yep.